Okay, we're going to be talking a little bit about miracle critique, or applying critical process to the concept of miracles. Now, this is an idea, and this is a method that I largely have to give credit to Kant for. This is a situation where Kant kind of built the car, and at most I've given it a new paint job, but I think there's some value in giving Kant's cars a new paint job because he's very much of the Henry Ford school. You can have any color as long as it's black. Or the Harrison Ford school. I'll play any character as long as it's Harrison Ford. What we're concerned with here, in the broad strokes, is the idea of the miracle and how it fits into our attempt to make sense of our environment and our lives. Okay, first we're going to agree that we do make some effort to make sense of our lives, that we do try to correlate things, that we do try to reconcile them with each other, so that there is some sort of cohesion, wherein this thing relates to that thing, and we can connect them by virtue of relationship. What we are doing when we do this is generally coming up with predictable rules for reality, upon which we can base decisions. In order to intelligently or intelligibly correlate our decision to some desired outcome, we have to have at least a rough idea of predictable consequence. And so we try to make sense of our environment, wherein we can say that this will probably follow that. When we see the miracle, either firsthand or as a second-hand account, we are observing necessarily an exception to those rules. That's kind of what a miracle is. This follows that, follows this, follows that, except on this occasion it didn't. Except on this occasion we have a suspension of the normal operation of causality. A little bit of spit and a little bit of dirt will not predictably restore the sight of someone born blind. So a miracle is an exception to the normal sequence of rules by which we attempt to govern and determine our lives and actions. So how do we take the miracle into account when we are considering these rules? Well, according to the miracle critique, we can't. We don't. As far as we can take it in terms of rationalizing or incorporating a miracle into a rational set of beliefs is that exceptions to the rules do occur. We can observe a miracle and we can say, aha, the rules are not absolute. There are exceptions, and that's as far as we can take it. Now, what we're expressing here is something that is actually very similar to a concept that exists in scientific, mathematical, or engineering principles. The idea of the impossibility of a no-tolerance system. That in any system, however rational, however clear, however well-considered, there will be exceptions. We find that the idea of the miracle as an exception to predictable causality fits very neatly into this principle. Depending on the discipline we're operating in, we might term this principle fault of no tolerance, we might call it fallacy of absolute tolerance, we could call it the zero differential problem, but it amounts to the same thing. And all of these ideas are very, very similar, and I would say sympathetic to the miracle critique. But can we do anything else with the miracle, other than recognize that exceptions do occur? Not really. We cannot say, for example, that we believe this, that, or the other thing because of miraculous occurrence. When we're talking about a belief, when we're talking about something that is true all the time, that we believe is true all the time, we're talking about something that is predictably true, that is true in the context of day-to-day, 24/7 reality. When we're talking, for example, about the existence of God, we're saying that God is real all the time, and that this is true all the time. As such, the idea that God is real is reflected in normal operation of reality. Just as God is always real, the reality in which God exists corresponds to the reality that we deal with all the time, the predictable reality that we try to make coherent sense of. So we do not and cannot intelligibly believe in the existence of God based on miracles. We can for many other reasons. We can believe that God is real because we have a constant awareness of God's presence, or a belief that God is constantly present and represented in the rules that govern reality. However, we cannot say that we believe that God is real simply because God suspends the rules from time to time. There is something else that we can say from the miracle critique, and that is that miracles are not and cannot be predictable. This points to one of the fundamental practical applications for which this argument was originally drafted. A common point in atheist debate today, and also a common point in atheist debate in Kant's time, was that if God is real, why can we not force him to produce a miracle? To which, through this argument, we can, and Kant did, reply that the minute you're dealing with something predictable, the minute you're dealing with something that is directly within your capacity to control, you are no longer talking about a miracle. If miracles, or what we would call miracles, become predictable in such a fashion that we can predictably determine that this cause will result in this effect, they're no longer an exception to the rules, but are rather a set of rules unto themselves. Now, how is our intellectual environment, the general thought of the age, different than the environment that Immanuel Kant was responding to, and how does that provide us a unique utility for this argument? One of the preeminent philosophical propositions in our era is the verification principle. It is starting to lose some ground. People are starting to move past it. But the verification principle and its child concept, falsifiability, are still very much alive and well. The verification principle states that only that which can be empirically verified and tested can be meaningfully said to be true. The falsification principle, kind of a subset of verification, says that only that which could be shown to be false can be meaningfully said to be true. Basically, if it is not possible to disprove it, then we cannot say that it is even possibly, in a meaningful way, true. Now, first, the problems with these two arguments are that their own criteria for what can meaningfully be said cannot be applied to them. We cannot empirically test the verification principle, nor, for that matter, can we provide contrary empirical evidence for falsification to disprove it. Both these arguments ultimately fail their own tests. The other problem, particular to falsifiability, is that rationally, we cannot ultimately disprove anything. We cannot, beyond a shadow of a doubt, demonstrate that a given concept is false, simply because, in order to do so, we would need absolute totality of knowledge. Now, while this means that falsifiability may have some utility, it may have some utility for practical application, it's by no means a reliable test for what is absolutely true. You're probably a couple of steps ahead of me already, but bear with me. So how does the miracle critique give us a response to verification and falsifiability? Well, verification requires us to provide empirically, repeatably testable evidence that a given proposition is true. And in debate, the miracle is often proposed as this evidence. One might ask, can you predictably, demonstrably produce a miracle? And thanks to this argument, in the context of the miracle critique, we can say no, because if I could, it wouldn't be a miracle. And while falsifiability is, as I just outlined, ultimately self-defeating, the miracle critique also provides us a unique response to that. Falsifiability asks us, if miraculous occurrence is true, can you demonstrate evidence that could potentially disprove it? Is it possible to disprove it? And again, we go to miracles are an exception to the rule. Any evidence that we provide to indicate that a miracle will not occur is only a reflection of predictable rules, of which miracles are necessarily an exception. And we can then, again, point to no tolerance regarding that, saying that, of course, any system of conclusions is going to be necessarily flawed, and absolute predictability is not possible, so miracles can necessarily occur. So, as always, if there are points that I didn't cover very well, if there are points where I was a little hazy, a little sketchy, please feel free to ask questions. Feel free to let me know where I could perhaps communicate the idea a little more clearly.